Comics Are Dope is brought to you by the greatest shop in the world, my LCS, Fight or Flight Comics. And no, I'm not biased at all. They have a great selection of everything from new weekly comics to back issues, rare variants and statues and collectibles. They've got all sorts of stuff. And if you really want to follow what's going on, you got to follow them on Instagram. That way you can see when they get new collections in, when their latest signing or in-store events are, and what's in stock. So check out Fight or Flight Comics in Raleigh, North Carolina in the Triangle Town Center Mall and tell them BJ Kicks sent you. Now, let's start the show. Well, guys, it's not an interview unless I start off with, well, guys. And today we've got a really special one. There's not a lot of names that I can say have been with me from the beginning of my comic book journey. But today's guest absolutely has. And so before I even get into the story, let me welcome to the Comics Are Dope podcast, Mr. Geoff Johns. How you doing today, sir?
Good. How are you, Brandon? Thanks for the intro.
Oh, no problem at all.
Making me feel nice and old.
Well, maybe this cleans it up a little bit. So I didn't get into comics until 2019. So of all the...
Wow, you're new. Really?
Yeah, I'm probably the newest of like most of the YouTube people. And what got me into comics, I just kind of wandered into a shop with my daughter for a free comic book day event and just kind of stayed connected on social media and eventually got hooked. And comics just kind of went from like a cool hobby at my dead end job to like an all out passion during the pandemic. And then here we are post pandemic and I still can't stop talking about them. So
I love that.
That's how we got here. But it's funny, I'm preparing to move right now. And so I'm in this weird like pre-packing phase where I'm just trying to figure out where all my stuff is, categorize things, and then I can start putting them in boxes that'll be clearly labeled. And I didn't realize until like 2 days ago how much Geoff Johns is in my collection. Because when you get into comics, at least for me, YouTube is a big part of that. And I'm like, okay, well, what are the best stories to read? And so often it's like where to start with Batman or Superman or whomever. And there's always a Geoff Johns story there. I feel like it's you and Mark Waid that just are the best at introducing people to characters. And so it was just funny going through all these shelves and all these books I've got to move. It's like, man, I've got so much Geoff Johns. And then one of the first books I picked up was a trade of your New 52 Justice League, that first 6 issues with Jim Lee. And it was just, again, a great intro to all of these characters on this team and sort of seeing relationship dynamics, having been a big fan of animated stuff and then coming into comics. So it was just really cool. This is kind of a full circle moment for me to be able to even speak with you. So appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks, Brandon. That's nice. I love that you got into it and then the pandemic. It was obviously terrible, but an opportunity for a lot of things and finding comics and really diving into them. I remember there were a lot of great books coming out during that time to read. So, and then a lot of great, classic trades or whatever, if you haven't read them. So that was probably a perfect time to have the time to get into it.
For sure. There were so many collected editions because there was a point where the shops kind of stopped distributing comics. There were no new comics on the shelves. And so it was like you found an online retailer or you went on eBay and you get your fix. I guess for me, it was cool because everything was new to me. But yeah, Aquaman, there was a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have read otherwise that the pandemic caught me.
I love that. I loved, speaking of introducing characters, I love Mark Waid's work. He was like, for me, he was one of my absolute favorite writers when I started really getting into comic books in late high school and college. And I loved his. There's like a handful of people I think that really, for me, capture the DC universe in comic books, and Mark Waid is right up there with like Grant and James Robinson and a few others. But Mark's any DC character he writes, he always nails. He always has the heart. The heart is always there, and that's what I really appreciate in his work. But I learned a lot from him and from James and Grant and John Ostrander, Keith Giffen, like just a lot of great writers at Marv Wolfman, like that I reading, and I would love how they would take characters like Beast Boy, who was such a minor character in Doom Patrol and then made him a major character in Titans. I love that. And that was something I always thought there was so much opportunity to do something like Aquaman. When people, it'd be great when people would say, don't waste your time on Aquaman. I love when people say that. It was so much fun because I was like, that's why I'm doing it. It's because people don't appreciate the character yet. And I want them to. I want them to appreciate the character like I do. That was really always my motivation.
For sure. And, I think because your body of work is so expansive, it's probably really easy for us to kind of turn this conversation into sort of a career retrospective. And I don't want to do that. As of course, we're here to talk about Ghost Machine. We're basically a year into sort of this Ghost Machine experiment that we've kind of seen play out. But for me, I'm very curious as to sort of how everything that's led up to this has informed what Ghost Machine has become. And I guess I'll start with I was sort of a late comer to Ghost Machine. I guess I shouldn't say that. I've been on Ghost Machine from the beginning, like when they guys did that one shot earlier this year. But for me, I was like, okay, I'm really excited about this Family Odysseys thing. This feels like something that, I'm not already reading. And I think, sort of just as a consumer, it was easy to kind of feel like, all right, well, I've got so much Geoff Johns in my collection. Maybe I can expect what he's going to do. And, I'm looking for something fresh, or I just, I've got too many books on the pull, or whatever. Right. But then I start reading it. I'm like 3 issues into everything. And the one thing that hooks me is this book, Hyde Street, that, I say it so often that it's almost like a running joke, but I generally don't do horror in comics. Like my only real hard lines are I don't really do horror, and I don't do like graphic nudity or sexuality in comics. But I grab Hyde Street #1 after people are just like, you gotta read it, you gotta read it, you gotta read it. And man, if this kid Pranky doesn't just like grab me. And there's something I heard you say in a different interview was like, once you know the point of a story, or every story has got to have a point. And once you know that point, like you kind of know what story you're going to tell. And for me, like with sci-fi, with horror, it's like I've got to be able to kind of see an underlying theme in order to get past the medium that's being brought to me in. And seeing this kid Pranky just sort of represent like retribution personified, like you might have made this little mistake, or you might have, just veered left a little bit. And here it is. Here is your punishment. Just, I don't know, just resonated with me. Um, what, where's Frankie come from? Like, how does an idea like that even spring forth?
Well, it's interesting because I love writing, and I've written, like you said, I've written a lot, right? I've written a lot of comic books, almost entirely superheroes. And there's certain things in superhero comics that they're just part of the universe, the medium, costumes and capes um and themes. There's a lot of common themes in superhero books. I always tried to find something new to explore because I want to explore something like, what's it really about? What am I exploring in the character? And in Ghost Machine, what I've been so lucky to do is kind of start to explore things I've never explored before, because the books allow it. Like I've never written a horror book. I've never written a book where some of the main characters are a Boy Scout and a failed advertising executive. Like that's just and I didn't plan on it. I didn't say like, I'm going to write a Boy Scout. I was thinking about I love books like Tales from the Crypt. I love shows like Twilight Zone and Black Mirror. But I also love ongoing characters, ongoing stories, mythologies. And so when I was thinking about Hyde Street with Ivan, I wanted to do something that was, and I love Universal Monsters. Like I've never really explored any of that passion I have for all of that in anything I've ever done. A little bit in Blackest Night, maybe a little bit in Aquaman the Trench, but not completely. And so when Ivan was like, I'd love to do a horror book. I'm like, I would too, but I want to do it different. I'm not into gore for gore's sake. I'm not cynical in my work. I don't like cynicism. I want to point to it all. And so started thinking about the choices we make in life and then how those choices come back to haunt you. They can be small or they can be big. And we all make mistakes, everybody. There's no one gets away from it. And so, and I wanted a group of characters that I could explore while I was doing these stories that would actually be the story. The story wasn't actually like, I think there's a trick to Hyde Street where people might think, oh, the story are people who are getting what they deserve. But actually, the story is not that. The story has got that in there, but the story is also about these people, the residents like Pranky, like Mr. X-Ray, like the Matinee Monster, we'll meet in issue 4, who these people are that got them there. And their mission of, I guess, retribution, enacting retribution. For Pranky, for me, I felt he developed out of honestly, partly influenced by my son, which is pretty funny. But also my love for like Little Rascals and like these kids that get into trouble that are a little more, they're strangely more innocent in some ways than today, but they're also more reckless. And Pranky developed from, if I was going to send an arbiter of retribution, in what form would they take that would be interesting? And well, that form would be a Boy Scout from 1955 who asks a little old lady to cross, if she can help her cross the street. And it turns out that little old lady is there's a lot of layers to people. That little lady isn't so innocent. So Pranky developed from kind of just what would be an interesting embodiment of a character rather than have like, you've seen like the cliche, I don't know, or maybe typical, monsters or zombies or like whatever, crypt keepers, whatever it would be that would enact this kind of thing, and having it take form in the shape of a Boy Scout, and having that character then have their own story, their own journey, their own pathos, their own reason for doing what they do. It made it infinitely more interesting to me to have a horror series that had characters that were ongoing, recurring, and that was actually what the story was going to be about. So Pranky developed from that when I was thinking about all the anthologies I love, and but also I didn't want to do a straight anthology. I would do something that I could explore characters and a bigger mythology, a bigger mystery to what it all means behind it. And for me, Pranky just delights me because he's dark, but he's funny and he's scary, and I can relate to him. I understand why he does what he does. He has a young point of view. And he's also he's fun to write. It's funny because these characters, when you really hit on a character, and I've done it, a couple times, I've been lucky enough. Sometimes these characters start talking and they talk so much. They just kind of, people say they write themselves, but they just kind of take over. And Pranky, all these characters have done that to me. But that's where he came from. He just came from a lot of exploration of the types of things I wanted to explore, what the choices we make in life, how they can come back to us, and in what ridiculous dark forms can surprise us in those stories. And then also like giving Pranky a real backstory, a real point of view, because when he says, hey, if you hurt a kid, I'm going to hurt you, you're like, okay, I'm with you. Like, as horrible as this little kid is, you're like, well, those Boy Scouts were pretty mean to him, right? So he burned their camp down. Like, okay, like, I mean, he's not an outright evil form, even though he is pretty evil. And that's always fun to explore. I love exploring these types of characters. Like, there's not there's not really an altruistic. There's one actually. There's not really a lot of altruistic characters in Hyde Street, but I think they're real characters and relatable characters and fun characters and characters that have so much story behind them, which is why I've chosen the people I've chosen. You see that like that in issue one, that grid of characters, and they're all listed there. And what we'll come to see is every there's one from every decade for the last century plus. Frankie's from the 50s, X-Ray's from the 60s, Miss Goodbody the 80s, the Matinee Monster from the 40s, and you'll see that there's a reason behind it all. And I think that's also, I can't say everything about why Pranky, but that's probably as much as I can say without totally spoiling the book.
Right, right. No, there's a moment at the end of issue one of Hyde Street that, like, I don't know, I felt like it added dimension where, if I'm honest, I was enjoying the story enough. It didn't feel like a, a needed extra dimension, right? But there's this point where it's Pranky versus Mr. X-Ray, and Pranky's just like, you adults always think you can just kind of overlook us or just make us do whatever you want. And it's
Yeah.
like, I'd have been totally fine if he was just getting revenge because some kids were mean to him. But it's like, not only is it like, okay, I'm battling sort of insignificance from my peers, but also just kind of insignificance from the world around me. And then when you see how that sort of has made him such an effective tool for retribution, it's just like, oh, now I just got to see like everything about this kid.
Yeah, I love the kid has, because adults are always trying to control kids, right? Manipulate, mold, shape, lead. I think, and Prank's experiences have been largely negative, but I think, he has been overlooked and felt very powerless in his life. There's a great scene in issue 2 I love, where he's sitting on the door, the porch steps of his house, and the cops are there, and they're telling him, "Hey, don't make the dad's mad so much.
Mm-hmm.
Like you gotta, like, maybe you should join the Boy Scouts and straighten yourself out." Like, they're blaming him for everything.
Right.
And I feel like he's always been blamed for everything. And it's interesting because there's probably a moment, and we see it a little bit in issue 2, where he finally said enough. And if you read the profile on the back of issue 2, it talks a little bit about Pranky, and there's something in there that says he never confronted his father, which is a really important piece of story.
Mm-hmm.
Is that for all this, the camp counselor, the teachers, the this, the that, he'll confront anybody, any adult particularly, but anyone. And yet there's that throwaway line, which isn't a throwaway line, where he never confronted his father. And there's a lot to that, a lot of story to that. But I just find that character fascinating, super funny, as twisted as he is. And he's got a streak of innocent in him, streak of it, where he's still like, his thought process to me is, it's not completely corrupted. He doesn't do any of this for sadistic pleasure, even though he laughs at things or whatever. Kids laugh when things happen, right? Someone slips on a banana peel in front of you, a kid's going to laugh. It's funny. But he's a very interesting character because he walks this line for me in my head of, he's just not evil, even though he does a lot of evil stuff.
So like, for me, getting into Hyde Street and enjoying it as much as I did, as someone who's not a horror fan, right? Like, that kind of just encourages you, like, all right, well, I got to go see what else is going on. And you already mentioned it, but like, a lot of these stories, this whole unnamed universe, but then even Hyde Street's kind of its own separate thing, but they're tied together in an interesting way. You've got characters from each decade, but what really kind of stands out to me is how different each book is from each other. Each character is from one another. And you talked about it earlier, like just kind of wanting to do something you hadn't done before. And like, for me, this is episode 56 of this podcast. And so like, the further we go along, the harder it is for me to find questions that I haven't asked before, right? And you've written way more than 56 issues of comics, right? And it's like, how deep do you really have to go to find stories you haven't told, and how do you find them?
It's funny because, and this is really something I hoped for, but I didn't expect and I didn't set out to do when I was thinking about all these books. With Redcoat, it became, and part of it, honestly, Brandon, is the people I'm working with, right? Is that I'm working with people. That's the whole point of Ghost Machine, is work with collaborators that you respect, and you have a shared, creative ownership of this stuff we're doing. And so a book like Redcoat, it really comes down to what I like exploring for me as a writer, life. It's just life. Like, and the thing I love about Simon, he's got a long, long life, and exploring, like, how long does it take for someone to really change? How hard is it for someone to truly, truly change? And on the surface, you might think, well, Simon doesn't change at all, but actually he does change, just at a very slow pace. But when Brian and I set out to do Redcoat, we thought it was going to be a little more action heavy, or more serious, I guess. And it became funnier because life is funny. And Brian and I have a great time together. And suddenly Simon was more of a scoundrel and a rascal and a just kind of a ne'er-do-well than I think either one of us expected. And that was a little bit of the character talking to us. But what that book allows me to do is to literally just explore life through a wonderful character who has a perspective on life that can go anywhere. So, for example, issue 9 is a story about Simon that is him and Johnny Appleseed. And it's a big part of the book. It's a big part of the lore. But that specific story, when I sat down to write it and thought about it, all I wanted to do was explore friendship. What is it with friends? Like, because friends are so valuable. They're by choice. There's a responsibility to friends, but there's also a good friend doesn't judge, or not often, right? Or judge in a healthy way. But for me, that book was allowing me to explore friendship. And so a book like Redcoat, as a writer, I get to sit there and go, okay, like I know the kind of the bigger plot, the story that Simon's going through, where we're like, we've got to plot it out now. I think Brian and I probably have the first 75 issues already plotted for Redcoat. And because every time we talk, we have more story and we add on. Like a month and a half ago at New York Comic Con, we had 3. We're like, well, wow, we just figured out through issue 50. And then literally last week we were talking. I'm like, I think that's 75. And Brian was like, that's probably 75. And I was like, that's awesome. And the reason I can do that is because I'm exploring what it's like to be alive, what it's like to move through life and learn and fail and succeed and fall in love and have a falling out with a friend, come face to face with the reality of how bad people can be, and then on the other hand, how good people can be, and how does that affect you and your the way about you. And so, and Redcoat has a journey. We know we know what we don't know what number the last issue will be, but we know the end of the story, even though we want to do it for 100+ issues. And so every single one of these books is an exploration. GEIGER is an exploration of being a father for me. And it started off as like, kind of like, oh, it's about protection, right? And you kind of learn that, well, it's actually about a lot more than that. And at first it was like, what would I do to protect my kid? And that changes and grows into something as you go through it, through parenthood, which is really, I mean, you're a parent, right? So
Yeah,
it's a real experience. They're like, oh, it changes you forever. I'm like, It does in some ways, and in some ways it doesn't change you at all. It's really interesting. But it does add a huge thing. And so for Geiger, that started out, and Gary has kids, as us exploring just being a dad. And that was super rewarding to do that. And it's been like that, even though the story of Geiger, spoiler alert, for those who don't know, lost his family. He's still dealing with that. He's still acting as that role, only to the world now. And now it's a guy who made a lot of mistakes, and now he's trying to, he crossed the line for his family over and over again, and he still does it. And it's a guy trying to find himself again, the man in the monster. And that to me is just a wonderful character to explore, because he's never going to fully let go of that monster ever. And he's never going to fully, and we have a great arc coming up, issue 10. It starts in issue 10 and it goes past the first year, but I'm super excited for people to read it. Because I'm working on issue 13 right now, and I'm right in the middle of it. And so that book's exploring something very different too. And the characters in that are exploring different things, like Nate, the Nuclear Knight. Then you go to Rook, and that's a completely different type of book, right? And I'd say the style, the tone, the emotional center, all of them, they should be different, because I don't want to just keep doing the same thing. I want to explore things that are important to me, and also universal. I like the universal exploration of friendship. That's just cool. Friendship, or making a bad choice, or confronting somebody, or whatever it is. There's all these cool things that are at the center of these stories that I then build everything around. But the heart of it is coming from the style of it, the execution of it. It's informed by everything, film and comics and books and life. But the things in the center, the heart, are that's informed by just being a human being, and I love that.
Yeah, and those are the things that stick with you. One of the first comics I read featuring Superman was Brainiac. I'd gotten this collection in like a mystery box, and so I read Superman Brainiac. And for me, I might have been the biggest Superman hater before I read Superman.
Oh,
Because I grew up with the Batman animated series, and I remember when Superman came out, and I was just like, "This ain't it." Like, take me back to Gotham. And so, I'm asking people like, "All right, like, tell me a Superman story I should read, like, to get this character." And Brainiac was just happened to come across my desk, and so I read it. And there's this moment at the end with Clark and Pa Kent, and it's just like, hits me right there in the feels. I gotta stop and shout out my good friend Danny, who is a sponsor of this show, owner of my LCS Fighter Flight Comics in Raleigh. He keeps a running list of comics that make him cry. And apparently, the Rebirth special is one of those, right?
oh
Like
yeah.
that moment at the end, like, of course I remember you,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, I love that moment at the end. Yeah.
It's-
I'll tell you a little bit about, after you're done. I'll tell you a little bit about that design of that moment.
Okay. But yeah, all that to say, right? Like, I think for me as a reader, a lot of times I imagine the comic writing process or the creation process being like, oh, well, what if there was an explosion? And, the artist wants to draw this thing or that thing. But it's funny that, like, when we're talking about your work, what it keeps coming back to are these universal themes. And those are largely the moments that I remember. Um, but yeah, you go ahead.
Well, I mean, look, the action's awesome. The moments, I try and like intercut the big action and the emotion crescendo in the same time, right? It's not like I've seen, like, it happens all the time. I see, like, there's a bunch of action and then there's an emotional scene. There's a bunch of, I'm like, that's it. All is the same,
Hmm.
right? So at the end of Geiger 6, when he is out of control and he tells those his rods are broken, the thing that helps him control his power, it's gone. And these two kids who he's fought to get to safety and then has to fight himself. Now he's the danger to them, and he says, "Go. You need to go." And they say no. it got me choked up when I was writing it. They say, no, we're here. And they don't leave his side. And he's like, I don't want to hurt you. He's like, you're not going to hurt us. And they don't leave his side. And there's this great shot of them at both of them at each side. And they're the rods. They become the rods. And that emotional kind of calming, because it's about the peace within him. And you see him for a moment, he's able to suppress it because he doesn't want to hurt these kids. And he's never been able to do that in years. He's never been able to do that. But these kids, their faith in him, their love for him, you know, his family kept him grounded and he lost them, and he finds a new family, at least momentarily, that he helps. And that to me is like that's the same moment. That's the emotional moment, the action moment, the same moment. You could say the same thing for Sinestro Corps. When, if you ever read that, at the end, there's a great final battle between Sinestro, Hal, and Kyle. The power rings they're empty. And they're jumping from literally across rooftops and half-constructed buildings and smashing through windows and having this fight and Hal's overcoming his fear with help from Kyle, who saved him in the first place. That was all emotional. To me, everything crescendos together, the action and the emotion. So, but when I look back at some of the stories I was a part of, or the books I'm working on now, it's the emotional stuff. Redcoat 7, the epilogue with Simon visiting Albert Einstein, that to me is like, it doesn't work without the first 6 issues, right? You need to have Simon, grow to love this kid, this smart kid from Munich. And there's a great moment where he pushes him away, and he does it in a very crass way, but it's revealed he does it because he doesn't want him to get hurt. And then to go decades in the future in issue 7 and just have an issue where Simon's visiting him, and they have, Albert's super excited to see him and hear about his adventures, and kind of like remembers the good old, swashbuckling days with Redcoat, Simon, Mr. Pure, and then goes on to talk to Simon about there's a bunch of stuff in there that will spoil a bunch of other stories, and I won't get into it. But he says, the one thing Albert says to Simon is like, you deserve happiness. Be happy. Find it. However you can find it, you deserve happiness. Because Simon does not think he deserves anything underneath all that. I love that moment. But all these emotional moments throughout it all, in the DC Universe Rebirth, I was like, Wally West is my favorite character. I go, Wally West. Growing up, I read every issue of that book, and I love that character. And having him erased from DC continuity, that great run with Mark Waid was my favorite comic. To bring him back, but have him come back, and when he's just trying to warn them. That's it. He's like, I'm not trying to, he's like trying to get back. He can't do it. He's just trying to warn them, remind them. And Barry looks at him that moment. I remember, I need this moment to sit for a while. I need Wally to say a goodbye. That's why the moment works. Because Wally's in front of Barry, and Barry says, I don't know who you are. And Wally says, that's okay. But this is what you meant to me. And thank you for everything you did for me. Thank you for being this, and thank you for this. And I'm not going to go with sadness or anger or anything but gratitude and love. And he says goodbye. And that's why that moment works. And he says, and as soon as he says all that, it stirs enough in Barry's head that it overcomes any kind of, universe it goes beyond anything. That love goes beyond anything, and suddenly that boom, that connection hits, that lightning bolt hits Barry, and he's like, Wally, and grabs. I mean, I still get choked up thinking about that scene because it's such a wonderful scene, and that to me was the heart of. If you're saying point to a couple scenes that talk about the heart of the DC universe, I'm like, that scene is the heart. I was writing that issue aching for the return of the emotional connections between the characters. I didn't care when the New 52 came out, and all these stories were including a lot of my own, were no longer in continuity, because that's kind of just, it's really whatever it is in continuity. It wasn't the stories I missed, because when I was like, it's not the reason that it was feeling difficult at times for me to work in, is like, it wasn't the stories, it was the relationships, the emotional things that the characters lost by rebooting everything. Um, and that was my way of expressing the emotion I thought was gone. It was DC Universe Rebirth is just, this is the heart of the DC Universe that was missing for me when the New 52 launched. And it was harder to see at the beginning, but as it went on, I just was like, I miss Black Canary and Green Arrow. I miss the character relationships, the care about one another, the love, the tension, everything, the history between characters, not the stories necessarily, but because the stories are still there, but it was the history. It was the emotional stuff, because you could always say, well, this happened or that happened, but I felt like the emotional heart was gone. And so when I wrote DC Universe Rebirth, it was therapy for me, really. It was like, this is a reminder of why I love DC, you know. And if it was gonna be my last DC book or whatever, I was like, I'm okay with that. Like Wally, like, this is, I love it. I just always will love it.
Yeah, well, it seems like we're talking about, emotions that matter, sort of conveyed through moments that matter. I just very recently was reading, I think it's Booster Gold 37, and he's on this mission. He's trying to go back in time and basically prevent Barbara from being shot in the Killing
I
Joke.
love that. Yeah.
And
Number 4, I think.
mm, and,
Yeah.
and so he keeps going back in time trying to prevent this thing from happening. And the short version of the story is the moment was always supposed to happen. No matter how many times he goes back, the Joker is going to win that moment. And for me, having read that, I grabbed it. It was in a collection. Like, I'm dumb. I double dip a lot. So I've got all these Batman omnis, but then Fan Home just grabbed this license for this Legend of Batman thing with these connecting spines. And so I bought that too. And so that story was sandwiched in the Killing Joke hardcover, along
Oh,
with Batman Confidential #5. And then like there's like a Brave and the Bold issue in there, but all of it kind of focused on Barbara being Oracle. And it's like that collection kind of together tells a story of why she always needs to be Oracle. Uh, but largely due to that Booster Gold issue, where it's just like, no, like that happened, that was supposed to happen. There's nothing you can do to change it. And it's now meaningful because you know it's supposed to happen, right? Like, but again, for me, it's like when I'm reading that, it's just the emotion mattered. It's not so much about, okay, like, can Barbara walk? Can she not? It's like, what was that supposed to make you feel? Um,
yeah. It was supposed to make you feel, obviously, like sadness, frustration, and ultimately maybe not acceptance, but knowing that that's the only thing you're going to be able to do is accept this.
mm,
And I think in life, a lot of that, I've written a lot of stories about that, probably because I lost my sister, right? So Flashpoint is all about grief, all of it, what
mm,
grief does to people, every aspect of that story. What does grief do to people? That book, it's in that book. Um, but yeah, that Booster Gold story, one of my favorite stories. I loved working on that. That was a book people said, don't waste your time on Booster Gold. But to me, transforming a character that came back in history to get the accolades of being a superhero without really understanding what that meant. And then this series, my goal was to transform him so that he would remain the joke to the public, and yet his true heart was on the right path now, that he was actually becoming altruistic and a hero, even though the world around him could never know that. And that was that, and that's a story. That's a story about. It's funny. Like, I was talking to one of my friends, and I don't know. Someone said, we were talking to somebody, and they were like, they said something, and then they're like, "Well, you're wrong. You're wrong." And I'm like, "Okay," and they left. And my friend said, and my friend said, but they were wrong, and you were right. I said, I know. That's okay. I don't need them to know, right? Like, If they want to think they're right and I'm wrong, that's fine. It doesn't bother me. That's okay. I don't need to sit there and argue and convince somebody that they're wrong because it wasn't worth it, but it also just didn't matter. And I think Booster Gold had to learn the same thing. It's like, you don't need to be, as long as you know you're doing the right thing, that's all that matters. You don't need your name on a billboard or selling toothpaste or whatever Booster Gold was doing. Like, and that's the kind of stuff that really is fun to explore, because that's stuff you think about in real life. I was talking to one of my friends who, they were playing music in the gym or something, and someone complained about the music, not for a very good reason, and so he turned it up. And then he felt bad about it. And I said, the thing is, it's very easy in life to just get worked up over things that don't really matter, and your ego gets the best of you, pride does, and Booster Gold was an exploration of that kind of danger of ego and pride. And I think one of the great DC characters, Dan Jurgens created one of the great DC characters. Such a kind of seemingly minor character, but when you look underneath it, so meaningful for every human being on this planet.
So we're talking about, emotions that matter, moments that matter, ultimately stories that matter. There's been a lot of conversation just as of late, like just of superhero fatigue, and there's this many reboots and relaunches and so on. And among all that, you've been kind of talking about your ambitions to carry the series for a long time. What is it about the long run that feels so meaningful?
I've done long runs, obviously, on a lot of books. And in these long runs, even from the GEIGER miniseries that we initially did, Gary and I, we did 1 through 6. This new ongoing series we've done, we're on issue 13. But there's issue 6 where it's just about the two-headed wolf, Barney, finding a zoo and befriending this mutant zebra and fowl. And that issue couldn't exist in a mini series, right? I feel like for me to really get under the hood of emotion and character and mythology, because I love mythology, but all the mythology is emotional. All the mythology is designed to challenge the emotional being that's at the center of your story. The mythology isn't just, let's list 30 different kinds of magic metals that do different properties and blah blah. Like that's not mythology. That's just kind of encyclopedic, listing of things, stuff. Real mythology is built to amplify and challenge the emotional journey of your characters. And you can't really do that. For me, I can't do that without an ongoing book. I was able to do that with Green Lantern or JSA or Flash or whatever, but I need the ongoing book. I want the ongoing book. If we had done Redcoat, it probably wouldn't have been issues 1 through 6, but we got to do, as a miniseries, we got to do issue 7, which was the Albert Einstein saying goodbye to Simon. We got to do issue 8, which is the first time Simon ever encounters. He's like, I've seen people kill each other. Been around for 100 years. I've seen people kill each other over money and this and that and this. But I've never seen people kill each other like for this reason. Real evil. For nothing. And that's an exploration I couldn't do. Or Simon having a drunken night with Johnny Appleseed. And their friendship being challenged and what that means. I couldn't do those issues. Or falling in love with meeting a girl and just getting bowled over. That's Simon and Annie Oakley. What's that like for him? He's like, he's been around for century plus, but when it's happened only a few times when he meets a girl and she just can't turn away from her. That's just a wonderful story. I could explore all these stories if I was doing mini series and having like Junkyard Joe return. There's a reason he returns, and it affects GEIGER and his arc in GEIGER 10. Like these ongoing books to me are the most fun writing, because you're writing serialized storytelling. It gives you opportunities to do these issues where you dive in deep to what would have been a panel moment. on Flash, I remember writing Flash ongoing. I'm like, oh, I want to write a Captain Cold issue. Everyone's like, Captain Cold's lame. Mr. Freeze is so much better. I'm like, Mr. Freeze is a wonderful character, but Captain Cold's a very different character. And I wrote this Flash issue 182. And I couldn't have done that if I hadn't been on the book for a year and a half already, because in that construct, they're like, Flash is only on one page. And DC finally said, well, you've done it long enough. If you really want to do that issue, you can. And we did it, and it turned out really well, so we could do more Rogue issues later on. But you can't do these things without ongoings. Sinestro Corps wouldn't have worked if I just done, I'm just going to do a Sinestro Corps run, because it would have just been a big, huge event, and I wouldn't have had all this buildup. And Blackest Night, the same thing. Throne of Atlantis, same thing. Like everything. I feel like you really, for me, I really enjoy the run up to the the emotional arc and the action arc and everything. But I like ongoings for that reason, is that I can explore everything. I also feel like there's so much out there right now, so many titles out there, that their consistency really matters. Is a character that you love, like Simon Pure. You fall in love with Breadcoat, and he's there month after month after month after month, exploring different things, but giving you deeper and deeper layers to him and revealing things about him and the stories and what he's involved in. As a reader, I love that. I remember reading Peter David's Hulk, and it went on for years. I loved that it was there. Or Walking Dead, I loved that it was there every month. It's just something that was so nice to have in my life. These characters that I love to see over and over and over. That's why you have all the constant reboots and this and that. And superheroes, we're it's funny because all of us at Ghost Machine, we're not anti-superhero at all. We love superheroes, and a lot of our books are kind of superhero adjacent. They're not typical capes and tights stuff, and we don't do superhero books right now. But we decided to do that a couple of years ago when we first started this. Is I wanted to do something different. I wanted to explore, science fiction or horror or post-nuclear war or history. I love history. How do I explore American history? And that's where all these books develop. Rockefellers and Hornsby and Halo, 2 great books, by the way. But yeah. Anyway, that's why ongoings to me are so important and so wonderful to exist. I don't know what other medium you have this kind of. I've said this before. I don't know if there's any other character in fiction that's had as many stories told about them as Batman. I don't think there probably are, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, right? I don't think there's another character out there that has had as many stories told about them as Batman. And reboots and relaunches. One of the things even on Rook we don't want to do is ever, even though like Rook comes out, we have 6 issues a year, but the next issue is issue 7. And because we want we want these ongoings, we don't want to just get new number ones, and it becomes like, it becomes less special, right? Yeah. It's going to be weird when Geiger has a higher number than Batman, right?
Right.
Or Redcoat has a higher number than Superman. That's just odd to me.
Apparently both of those are happening next year, according to rumors. But
Superman's only on like issue 25 right now.
That's true. That's crazy. But what's funny is, like, I don't know, because not to go off on too much of a tangent, but like I'm buying Action Comics right now, and the reason I'm buying it is because I have a run that starts with 1,000, and I don't want to like stop it, because it's like, it's just fun seeing the numbers go up. So It's interesting that there's all these reboots, and the idea is like, oh, we'll get more people to buy it if we reboot it.
Yeah, I think you get caught in a cycle. I understand it, because like you have people in those positions that aren't readers or collectors, or they just see the numbers, and it is easier to sell number 1. It'd be easier to sell another Rook 1 than it would be Rook 7, but that's just not what we're doing. We believe in the ongoing stories, and the stories and the characters and the artwork and the quality of the books and the paper and the covers is important. The consistency is important, and I love that you're never gonna. And also, I remember ending Green Lantern, and I've said this before, but like writing an ending for these books is hard, because they're gonna keep going. Right. These characters are gonna keep going. You're gonna you you can kill Alfred Pennyworth, but I promise you he's going to come back someday.
Right.
He just is. And to work on these books where we know we can tell a full story is exciting. That's really exciting. Like the Unnamed has all these characters to explore, and we can explore them as long as we want. And then, but there's only one version of Redcoat. There's only one version of Geiger. There's only one version of Rook, the Rockefellers, Mr. X-Ray Pranky. You're not going to get, is this Earth 8's Pranky or whatever. I think that's cool. And for clarity and for readers, just to be able to go someplace where they want to read about Redcoat, they can read about Redcoat, and that's it. It's there for them.
Yeah. And so, yeah, this conversation can easily go another 2 hours. As we're running short on time, something that's interesting to me, right? Like whenever we see like new creator-owned properties pop up, or in your case, a new creator-owned company, right? Like the immediate thought is, okay, well, they're going to do something that they can't do at, the big two, or they're going to do something that they've done at the big two, but with, a little bit more freedom, right? And you've talked a bit about like sort of the constraints of, working for big corporation comics, right? And but right now we're at this interesting moment. The Family Odysseys universe just launched as we're recording this, and it's like it feels like Ghost Machine is now sort of expanding beyond whatever ideas you might have first brought to it, even though all of this is collaborative. And so we're starting to see like more things take shape. Like there's over 20 creators at Ghost Machine, and we've seen like a handful of them so far. So as you guys are getting into like year two and beyond, what is it that you're seeing for Ghost Machine in the future? And I guess what does it mean to you to have it continue expanding and becoming more than just like your baby, so to speak?
Sure. I mean, it was always intended to be our creative collective of the creators that are part of Ghost Machine. We all own the company together. We all own every character together. And also we're very curated on the number of books we're doing. We've launched our cornerstone or core books have been launched, right? Geiger, Redcoat, Rook, Hyde Street, Rockefellers, Hornsby and Halo. We have the one-shot Devour, which was great by Maytal. We have two things I can't talk about them yet. Miniseries next year. First Ghost was already announced. Brad Meltzer's book we're doing. We're announcing the artist, I think, in February. But we're not going to expand a ton more because we don't want to have or need to have 10, 15, 20, 30, 100 books on the shelves a month. But that's not what we're about. So we've expanded our core to where it is. Our core is our core now. There'll be some miniseries, some things that connect or spin out, but really it's a pretty tight group of books. And our goal has always been to be character centric. Like this behind me is our universe, right? This wonderful thing that Gary Frank did. We had it last year. It was just had Rook and Direwolf and Junkyard Joe and Simon Pure and Geiger. It's in the middle there. Geiger, and then Gary went in and added the Hyde Street characters, Northerner, Hornsby and Halo, the Rockefellers. We always wanted to have this big, huge, panescape of characters, and that's what we've built to, and then we're investing in these characters. So the characters you see behind me, these are the characters we're investing in. So as we go into year two, these characters: Geiger, Redcoat, Rook, Hyde Street, Rockefellers, Hornsby and Halo, and everything else you see behind me. But our goal is we have kind of, we call them our four corners of reality at Ghost Machine, with the Unnamed, which is action adventure, Rook, which is sci-fi, Hyde Street, which is horror, and then Rockefellers and Hornsby and Halo, which is family, right? Family Odysseys. And our four corners of the universe, which are really four tones, but they allow us to do all these different kinds of stories, and some of them interconnect. You will see some connectivity between Rockefellers and Hornsby and Hale. You've seen connectivity between Geiger and Redcoat. You've seen connectivity even between the Devour one shot, and Hyde Street, the ongoing. But it's not to the detriment of the stories we're trying to tell or the characters we're building. And so year two is more investment in our characters, more exploration of our characters, and a few new books like First Ghost and another one I don't think we've announced the title yet, but Maytal's working on that also connects to Hyde Street in a nice subtle way, but a good way, um, like Devour did. And so that's our goal. Our goal is just to continue delivering great books. And look, corporate comics, I love working at DC. It was great. The the reason we built Ghost Machine is because we wanted to work with the people we wanted to work with. We wanted to be able to choose when the books came out, do cardstock covers, even though they're more expensive, do nice paper, be able to do a book about a immortal redcoat soldier set in 1892. And do books like the Rockefellers, do books in series we really believed in, and again work with people we love and respect and we know are going to deliver. That's why we all signed on together, because we believe in each other, and we believe in our mission. Our mission is very simple. It's deliver great character centric books consistently, and that's what we're going to do. That's what we've been doing. And as we enter, I guess, year two, officially after our announcement, our first book was published January 24, and we're almost into January 25. So 1 year later, we're really happy with how things are going and how the books are selling and how people are reacting to them.
Yeah, I will say, like, just this year, just kind of on a macro level, seems to be defined in comics by like these sort of new universes, right? We got the Ultimate Universe, we got DC Absolute, we got all this stuff. So there's either some new universe or like a ton of nostalgia, like Turtles are relaunching, um, you know, Absolute Batman, DC's going all in. Like there's all this stuff. Thundercats had a big debut this year. But so like right now, it's like I feel like it's the hardest time to be a comic fan because it's like no matter what direction you go, there's something great to pick up. But one thing I will say, having gone back and read most of it, like Ghost Machine just kind of feels uniquely special in that it's not like anything else. There's no necessarily nostalgia to draw back from. It's just great characters, great creative, and great quality product. Even looking at the booth at New York Comic Con, you got the action figure there. Like there's just something about it. It's just like it just kind of draws you in. And I gotta say, I'm happy with what I found once I took the leap.
Thanks, Brandon. I really appreciate that. We even down to like the Junkyard Joe action figure, like Mezco is such a wonderful, high quality toy company, that the fact that could team up with them and do that was awesome. But our goal is not quantity, our goal is quality, and we're very meticulous, on what we're doing. Like I'm so happy today because I get to write Redcoat. Like today is going to be a great day. Later in the week, I get to write Hyde Street. So, and next week I get to write Geiger. Every week, um, I'm excited to be able to do what I do and work with the people I work with, and this is what we're committed to, and it feels good because to hear you say we feel unique, it's great. I think our only goal ever has been in the business is to find a little corner in the comic shop that can be ours, where people can go and say, I know these are going to be good books, and pick them up.
For sure. And like I said, I mean, it definitely shows. So with that, I want to congratulate you on, a great year for Ghost Machine. I'm really excited to see what comes in year two. And listen, you're welcome back anytime. There's so much that we can cover, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more in the coming year.
That'd be great. Thanks, Brandon.
No problem at all. Well, guys, I don't know what you're doing after you listen to this interview. It should be going to your local comic shop and grabbing all the Ghost Machine you can find. But hey, after that, stay safe, stay awesome, and read something dope today. Peace.
Comics are dope.